You're listening to a Reliance podcast, conversations and insights about our efforts to end sexual violence in one generation.
Please pardon me for a moment.
Comes north and takes her from her. Just takes her like that. I mean it again. My heart is broken. Don't touch me.
The problem is that this is a show that has never treated rape very responsibly at all, and sort of took a crack at it 5 seasons too late. So I think it was hard to have that same response when it's in the Game of Thrones universe as it would have been somewhere else. So, for instance, if that scene had taken place on another drama, on a Grey's Anatomy or a Scandal or something like that, I don't think there would have been such a strong negative reaction to it. But when you have created a show based on, let's just show people walking around naked. Let's just show women with their tits out so 13-year-old boys will be excited about watching it. You've built a show off of the sexual exploitation of women. So it's very hard to transition to something that is actually thoughtful or appropriate that far into the game. And people aren't going to trust it. And I think Game of Thrones has itself as a production to blame for the fact that people really responded negatively of saying, no, I come here for this thing. I come here for this, fantasy, and if there's a lot of murder and a lot of brutality that just happens, I didn't come here to feel emotionally involved in something that is really traumatic.
Yeah. And so one of the things I'm thinking about too is that Tormund and Jaime have that moment with Brienne. Right. Remember? And it was funny because I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about, remember when Jaime cock blocked Tormund from going after, right? But then, and even talking about, there's an aggressiveness in, she clearly is not interested in him. I think when shows do stuff like this, you got to have a purpose and a point behind it. Right. But I think you make a really good point of saying that, you can't just throw it back into Game of Thrones and say, hey, let's cut this together and let's make an awareness campaign out of Game of Thrones for the next 3 years because young people will understand. And there's also something too about there's just a whole nother level of complexity before we even do that. So even where we're trying to say there is something that can be learned from this and it is confronting, there's also a problem too. It's just there's so much that you have to explain about that too.
Yeah, and I don't think I think they wanted to be responsible, but we all know how dangerous well-meaning people could be, without any sort of education behind it. So I think that's what it is that you can't try to be half-assed responsible in that way, because I don't think it really works. But I think the other point is one well taken. I mean, I think fans have really taken to Tormund's interest in Brienne and really, really like that. And in any other context outside of whatever realm that has been created here, it's creepy. Yeah. And I mean, I can tell you now, as a person who's been an advocate for 10 years and who really thinks about these things when I watch shows, this is the first time I've ever thought Tormund was creepy. Yeah. Because I find him so humorous that...
This has been building too, though, right?
But it has been building, and honestly, I think you're right, because Brienne has never been comfortable with his very outward affections towards her. I'm just he's so fun. But anyway, it is a really, really good point that I think things that we find as being humorous, someone that we think is likable, we don't really think about the fact that he has come on very,
creepy.
very strong, and he has been very, very creepy.
Right.
And I think any real life Tormund walking around right now, we would be horribly offended by. And even Jamie, I think going, into her room later, and it was definitely a ruse. It's not hot in there.
Right.
Jamie knew what he was doing.
First thing they teach you to do is build a fire down here. That's right.
It is 87 below zero in Winterfell. Everyone has a fire.
It's not hot
you know
enough.
what I mean?
It's not
hot enough. Bodies didn't decompose for 4 days in Winterfell.
Exactly.
It's not hot enough.
One thing that we talked about, the relationship between the Hound and Sansa, that at the end of the day, in his own way, the Hound has been, I think, a champion of Sansa, and we've seen him in his crude ways of trying to be sweet, like when her dad's head was cut off and she was hit by Joffrey, he gave her the linen to wipe the blood from her cheek and said, like, hey, keep it, it's going to happen again. It's just, or when she was almost assaulted, when the people tried to storm the royal family, and he saved her from a rape. There was something about, and this goes back to, I think it's like season 2 or 3, when the Hound said, hey, come with me, I'll keep you safe. And she chose to stay. That came back up in season 8, and when she talked about, when he said, hey, if you didn't come with me, this shit wouldn't happen. You'd have been all right. And we've talked a little bit about the whole point about her saying, like, yeah, but this wouldn't happen. But the paternalism and this idea that men protect women from assault, like, this, you were going to get raped in this world. That's why I was telling you, come with me. Like, and not even like blatantly, like you're going to get raped, but like it was going to be a rough road for you.
Right.
Like, no, how about like, hey, like, it's not okay that we have a world in which this exists.
Right.
And you're not supposed to protect women from this. This is not something that you should, that we should also champion, like, hey, that's a protector woman. And I find this for myself when I talk about instances in which either I have had the courage to speak up, and there's been plenty of times when I probably haven't in my lifetime where stuff happened. But when you have speak up, like, you shouldn't be championed because you spoke up, like, because you should. Like, that's the natural thing.
I think that this came up for me early on with The Walking Dead, too, because they created a fair number of female characters who were making the argument that we should try to build a home for everyone and keep, like, home-like comforts while the men protect us. There are zombies walking the earth. If you don't know how to fight them, you are going to die.
Right.
Like, the idea that your safety is dependent upon someone else always being there to protect you, on men, as to really facing the issue, which is, why are some men offending in the first place?
Right.
That's the whole, I think the whole point of prevention is saying, we have to figure out how to prevent mostly men, not all, but mostly men, and some women from committing violence, as opposed to saying, let's try to have some dudes stand guard next to you to protect you your whole life. That's not reasonable. That's not something that could actually happen. So I do think that making, who is now a very likable character in The Hound, say something like that gives it the weight and credibility that it doesn't deserve.
I think even if we really look at the strongest women outside of Arya, and so I'm saying Sansa, Cersei,
Olenna.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All of them have had some form of sexual violence involved in it. I mean, do you have a problem with the fact that, like, we do have to add this as a part of the storyline for women, for them to be strong? And, like, and I guess the thing is just because I know that the line is like, too, is like, women are also in a world in which that we have not changed the culture, and this stuff does happen. But that, like, it just continues to follow the narrative about, like, look how brave and strong these women are that they're able to come. Like, there's a problem in that, too, though.
Yeah.
Right? I
think for us, I'd say for a lot of advocates, but I know in my work at Reliance, like, one of the things that I think we often try to avoid saying is that you are brave if you come forward.
Right.
Because obviously we know that
Sure.
it's difficult for so many people and we completely respect it. But at the same time, for people who have lived through very traumatic experiences, the ability to live after that takes so much work that to say you are not brave because you moved on with your life, but you didn't make the choice to come forward. So you're not brave, whereas another person is, I think can be a really difficult dynamic. I do think having that perspective is irresponsible. But what I will say on top of that is I think, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the fact that there have been a couple of characters who may not have been a victim of sexual violence that were female, but they had to use their sexuality very obviously. So Marjorie, for instance, I think is a really great example of someone who we don't see being sexually assaulted ever. We don't know that she's ever had a history of sexual violence. But in order to survive her environment, she has to use sex to do that. So I think that also raises a very similar issue, which is how much about women on this show can be reduced to their sexuality.